wait for a moment before they freeze it? Are they waiting for rigor mortis to subside? Or is that what they're
They wait
waiting?
till it occurs. So that's just one of those processes that happens before, it gets, goes through that freezing process. And it's like, it's not going to be frozen per se, but it goes through a chilling process, if that makes sense.
Yes, thank you.
That's a great question. Any other questions about the process before we move forward? Okay, so that question that you asked, you actually sound like a great meat scientist.
Thank you.
So moving to section B, you're talking about the animal carcasses and meat products. So when you go and buy your meat, and you say, for instance, you buy a ham, or you buy, somebody mentioned spare ribs, and spare ribs are actually on this on the pork. So just like looking at it, it just shows you like the cuts and where they are, and then also like what they're broken down into. So you have the wholesale cuts of pork. That's the overall. So like if you someone wanted to go in and buy an animal and split the meat, these are the things that you would get if you get the whole pig. Now, but when you go to the market, you have them broken down into sections. So you see your pork chart, you have the retail cuts and, how to cook them and, where they come from. So these are some of the parts that you actually have and you consume. Anybody have any questions about pork? Okay, so moving forward to the wholesale cuts of beef. It's the similar thing about the cuts and understanding what you have. So you have that whole animal. Instead of the pork, you have the cow. So it just shows you the different cuts of what you might see if you go to the market. Anybody eat steak or like steak?
Yes.
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. Awesome. So it just pretty much show you the differences and the cuts, and then it's different types of steak. So it basically just show you where it derives from. What about ground beef?
Yeah.
You know the process of making the ground beef?
Oh no, ma'am.
It's
I
okay.
thought you were saying who like ground beef. I was like, yeah, me too.
Oh no, I did ask you were right, because normally the answers I get when you talk about ground beef is, well, you just get the ground beef and you cook it.
Mm-hmm.
But there's actually a process, which everything, is a process, of course. But mixing that meat, when you see something like 70-30, that means it's 30% fat. Or, what is it, 83-27 and things like that. That's the percent fat in the lean meat. So those things have to be mixed. So with those proportions, it's just different cuts, and they, mix it together, and then they grind the meat, and then that's what you have as your ground beef product. And then moving to the next section, you see your beef chart, and it's the same, similar to what you have as your, pork chart. And it pretty much goes to show you, okay, where does it come from and how to cook them. And then overall, going to your lab reports, you have to pretty much go in and answer the questions from what you see on Google, and then understanding each part or portion of what you see. So it's saying, why does the hog carcass travel through a scald tube? Some of those questions that you can find, but overall, it just pretty much gives you a brief introduction of what meat scientists do, what is happening in the processing unit and what causes these things. Because like when you were mentioning about the rigor mortis and the meat being tough, like what ways can you prevent your meat from being tough? Does it depend on like the animal age, the cut, and things like that? And these are the questions that we always want to answer, because even if you eat a steak, you don't want your steak to be tough. If you cook it, for a while, it might be tough. But what if you have a big cut of meat? You want that big cut of meat to be tender. What do you do? So those are the questions that you know, most of the time you have to answer when it comes to understanding your product, because like I like food safety, microbiology, meat science. One of the things that drew me toward it was knowing that, okay, I love to eat. I like food, you know, so, you know, what could be a profession going into that? And, you know, instead of going to be a doctor, I looked at meat science, and, you know, that's where I am now. And then for section B with the animal carcasses and meat products, you pretty much are just looking at the different cuts, you know, understanding where they came from, you know, and then what you know, you're putting pretty much a face to the cuts and then identifying them. And then the second section is just going to be flipped, and you want to know like where, you know, what species you find the cuts from.
We have two questions. Why is ground beef the slowest to digest?
Why is ground beef the slowest to digest?
Right.
That's a good question. It seems like the slowest to digest is kind of like a hard question, because it depends on the person, and then also the species, because, you know, with red meat, some people may or may not have issues with red meat, so it can go many ways with digestion. If you've seen it, it's the slowest to digest. I mean, sometimes it just might be those proteins and things when they're combined. That could be a possibility of it being slow to digest. But, you know, like I said, it varies between species, because a ground beef product may be different from a ground turkey, but they're made the same way.
Right. I think it's more along the lines of just beef, period. That's what beef been labeled
Yeah,
as.
beef overall, yes, because some of the causes, if you eat ground beef, you heard anything about gout and things like that. So it just depends. Even if it's beef, I mean, if it's beef, red meat consumption. But see, when they think about red meat consumption, a lot of times you refer to ground beef, but, you know, goat meat is red meat as well.
Right.
So it just all depends. And the goat meat is, you know, a really lean source of food, of meat.
The second question is, why is pork shoulder called Boston butt?
That's a great question. It's not relative to the location of it, because it is the shoulder. And a lot of times you say the shoulder, but that's just the known name that they call it, the Boston butt. But it's no relativity to like where it is located.
Just to go in for their informational purposes. You know, there's all people like their food cooked different ways. So you have well done, medium well, rare, and what is it, well done. So I guess speak to the importance of the temperature and what issues can they have when not reaching those temperatures.
Okay. So with the importance of the temperature, the USDA has guidelines for like each species and whatever you cook. So if you're cooking up a ground beef or whatever, they have with beef, pork, and chicken. They have specific temperatures that you have to cook it to. And the specific temperature to cook it to, it is helpful when reducing those pathogens, those foodborne illnesses like Salmonella, Campylobacter, and E. coli. Now, it's your responsibility, you yourself, if you decide to cook that meat at a lower temperature, your risk is elevated when it comes to these things. But they let you know the standard, and that's what it has to be, you know, cooked at. So with that medium rare, that temp may hit 160 or 145 or whatever it may be. But, you know, if it's that color, then you know that those are the things that you have to like think about when it comes to the consumption.
Someone said like tartar.
Yeah, that's something that, you know, it's on you. Because in other countries, they do eat raw meat. But, you know, their system is different from our system. You know, they don't have like a whole lot of regulations in underdeveloped countries, but they're you know, more tolerant to it because they're used to it.
Anybody have any? The floor is open. Anybody have any more questions? Anybody interested?
Yes, the floor is open to
science?
meat science.
Like Dr. Harris is meat science, food safety, microbiology. So if you're interested in those things, they have the new slaughtering facility that's being built on campus. So if you're interested in maybe working there or learning how your meats are processing all the way to packaging, that will be something that's available to you, hopefully sooner rather than later.
I have a question. So I know like for some people when it comes to like pork and stuff like that, they're not they don't think that it's a clean animal. Perhaps like they always just the fact that like I don't know how to form the question. But okay, basically what I
No,
was
I
trying
get
to
what you're saying.
yeah, you kind of a little bit.
Yeah, you're asking about like it's pretty much based on their diet and what they eat. Like for instance, what they consume. That's pretty much where they get come, you know, answer that question from that perspective of their diet. So if they eat anything, what do they call those? I cannot think of the name right now. But like they pretty much eat anything that's out there, could be dead or anything, but they're gonna consume it.
Right.
So you're saying like with that, because it's a word. It's a word that describes it, and I'm pretty sure I'll know that word when I get off of this. But for the most part, it's a like personal choice of, you know, why they decide not to eat it. What is the word?
I don't know.
You talking about omnivores?
Scavengers. Thank you. Yes, that's it. Scavengers. Yes.
Okay. But basically my question from that was, does this really affect the actual pig itself, or is it just like a myth?
Well, it's not a myth, but like, I mean, I don't have any problems with eating bacon or anything like that, or eating the pork product. It's not really a myth. It's facts that the scavengers will eat on anything. Yes, that's true. But does it affect you when it comes to consuming that product? It probably won't, but you know, that's what research has to be done in it, because I think it's more of a personal choice versus just not, you know, knowing what it is. Does that help?
Yeah, it does. Thank you.
Okay, you're welcome.
Any more questions?
Yes.
No more questions.
Did somebody say